honor and glorify you. All these things in your holy name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Give it up for Brad. All right. Well, good morning, guys. Y'all know this is my favorite environment where we're all spread out all over everywhere. But next week we will be in the chapel again and around the tables. Good morning. Welcome to Forge. And I also want to send a shout out to Oviedo City Church. And they're live streaming in Westview Baptist Church as well. But we got Dennis from Oviedo City Church sitting right down front, came live today. So we're glad to have you. And he's from Boston. If you start talking to him, he's a foreigner, but we're glad you're here. Let's give it up for Dennis. All right. Good to have you, man. All right. Well, it's good to have you guys all here. And I hope Thanksgiving for you was as good as it was for us. What a good time to be with family and an enjoyable time to worship. And I'm so thankful for what God has done in helping me get to know you guys. You guys are a gift to me and your families. I can't tell you, you encourage me so much. So I give thanks to God for you, for our Lord Jesus Christ. What a privilege to serve him. Well, listen, as we like to celebrate certain things. Elle, you're here today, and rather than in Maitland, so we're glad you're here, and you just had your third, you didn't, but your wife just had your third son. Rain is his name. I love it, right? Woo! He's going to be as tough as you, and right now you're tough. You can take him, but in a few years, watch out. Well, it is good to have you guys here. We're in our series from ordinary to extraordinary as we take a deep dive looking at character in a man's life. And I'll give you the 5-mark review here in a little while. We're going to be talking today about godly patriarchs. Now, as I say that word, I know that patriarchs is a controversial word today for some of us in American culture. It's one of those, and I chose it on purpose just to tick some people off. But the whole idea of patriarchs is the whole idea of fathers, and we're going to be talking about husbands and fathers, spiritual leaders as well. But patriarch is a great word, guys, and I want you to know it, accept it, and we're going to talk about it today. But, some words get categorized as being bad things, just like certain denominations do. Have you heard about the guy who took a tour of hell? There are 4 layers in hell, levels in hell. And he went to the first level of hell, and it was horrible, and he saw a lot of suffering, and he asked the guide what they did and who they were. He said, oh, they're Baptists. They're Baptists who danced. And so he got to the second level of hell, and he said, what are these guys? And he said, oh, they're Episcopalians. What did they do? They're Episcopalians who used up all their capital, No, really? He got to the third level of hell, which was worse and worse than everybody thought. He got down there and said, who are these people? They're Pentecostals who refuse to raise their hands in church. Then he got to the fourth level, and he said, who are these guys? This is horrible down here. He said, they're Presbyterians. They're Presbyterians who actually smiled and raised their hands in a formal worship service. And they used the wrong fork at dinner. So there it is. But we do categorize Presbyterians, Baptists, you name it, different denominations. We also wrongly characterize certain words. And patriarchs is one of those words. And that's why we're going to be talking about it today, because in the context of this series, we're looking at the qualifications for a leader, elder, deacon, pastor in a church, but also for a mature man. And so at Forge, we talk about the 5 marks of manhood: identity, purpose, character, confidence, and legacy. Identity is, who am I? In Christ, we're the deeply beloved, redeemed sons of the Most High God. Purpose answers the question, why am I on earth? Well, we're on earth because God has given us roles. We're leaders, worker providers, and warrior ambassadors of the gospel. And then character answers the question, how do I live? Well, we live the character of Christ, the fruit of the Spirit. Character is knowing how to live before you have to actually live it. And that makes all the difference in the world. And then, of course, that leads to confidence, and then legacy takes care of itself. So we're in a deep dive in the whole issue of character as we look in 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. So let me get that text back in our minds where the Apostle Paul says, it is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer then, and then he goes into qualifications. And remember, overseer, elder, bishop, pastor, but these also relate to deacons as well in the church, but also as a mature man. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. And here it is what we're going to look at today. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with what, guys? All dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? So we're talking really about the role of a man as the patriarch, the father of his home. And we in America have attacked men for the last 10, 15, 20 years have been open season on men. You had a target on your back. And I think it's interesting. I think I see somewhat in our culture some change beginning to take place. It's okay a little bit more now to be a man, but we still are attacked a great deal. Camille Paglia, my favorite lesbian feminist, and every Christian man should have one, I think. But she said the way we treat men in America is how a culture commits suicide. And I think that's true. And as men following Christ, we get to redeem our whole attitude. So here's the focus. You see those words in verses 4 and 5. That's our focus today, managing our own household well. Now, let me say a couple of initial points. One is this. This is not teaching that to be an elder, deacon, pastor, or a significant leader in the church, you have to be married. It's not saying that. Timothy, as far as we know, was not married. But what this is saying is that if you are married, that these things must be true about you in leadership. You must be able to manage your own household well. All right, so you understand that? That's what it's saying. This text also shows that there is a distinct connection between your nuclear family, our nuclear families, and the church family. It's important for us to understand that the Church of Jesus Christ is a family, right? An extended family, and should be thought of as an extended family. And so there's a deep connection here, and one big idea here is that the home life is a perfect place for training for leadership in the church. Did you catch that, guys? That for men, our home life and our home leadership is the perfect and the primary training ground for leadership in the church. And maybe that's a new concept to you, but it's important for us to understand how as we train our children and as we are trained as leaders in our own family, we then can become qualified for leadership in the church. So if you're a man and you're married and you're in leadership in the church and or you're leading your family and your leadership in your family is not working, the Apostle Paul would say, don't export it to the local church, right? And so this is a connection here that we need to see. The home is the most influential training point for leadership in the church. Now, having said that, again, the big idea here for all of us as mature men, whether you become an elder, deacon, pastor, or whatever, the big idea here is that to become a godly man, one of the marks of a godly man is what happens in his leadership with his wife as he's married and with his children. That's the big idea. Now, some of you are freaking out right now because you're saying, wait a minute, you mean I've got to lead and manage my family? I pay the bills and I own the house, I think, but I don't feel like I lead much or manage much. There's a lot of men that feel that way. They're paying the bills, but they don't feel like the leader of the house or the manager of the house, and they're saying, I didn't even know that was on my job description. And so it is. That's why we need to talk about the man as the family patriarch. See, this was something that Christians learned early on, way back. But it is something that has been lost, particularly in America today. Many of us did not have a father who by word or by modeling showed us what a man was, a godly man, nor how a family ought to be well led. And so, quite frankly, and at Forge, isn't it great we can be honest here at Forge? You can talk about it afterwards. It's great. I love being with you guys. We don't have to play games. A lot of us grew up in messed up homes, and we got married and created messed up homes. That's just a fact to some extent. And then we had to break those cycles and learn how to lead and manage well. And that's what we're talking about. Hey, listen, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. That's why I got this book, Everything Men Know About Women. 30th annual anniversary, worldwide bestseller, fully reveals the shocking truth, the Daily News said, by Dr. Alan Francis and Cindy Cashman. I'm still learning about family. Everything I know about women. Everything I know about women and men. We men know a whole lot and are drawn a whole lot to sex, but most of us don't get married thinking, hey, how can I learn to lead a family well? That's not what draws us into marriage. We have to be trained to do that. We have to be trained to see that that's one of our major purposes. So we get the identity purpose, right? We're leaders, worker providers, warrior ambassadors. A main purpose of our leadership is not only self-leadership, but after that, leadership of our family. That was the primary unit. And most of us were never taught that. My dad never said anything to me about the reality that marriage was leading my family. Not one thing, never, ever. Of course, he failed because I don't think it was on his mind as well. So let's talk about it with that by way of introduction. And where are you on the whole issue of being a patriarch? Okay, let's talk about what a patriarch is. I love that picture. A patriarch is, all right, you ready for this? Let's get intellectual. Etymologically, the word patriarch, and etymology is simply the origin of the word. So it comes from the Greek word patriarchos, which carries the idea of family, patria, and archein, to lead. So the word patriarch simply means the head, a male head of a family or tribe. In the Greek, the household, the Greek word is oikos. So the patriarch was the head of the oikos, the family. In Latin, it was the damos. And so there it is. Historically, we think of patriarchs all the time. You heard the word, everybody's heard the word patriarch, right? So we think of the patriarchs of the human race, in all those men, fathers, all the begats in the book of Genesis. So and so begat so and so and begat so and so, all that. And why is that there? Those are the fathers of the human race. And then we think of the patriarchs of Israel, particularly Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Sometimes you think of the patriarchs as the 12 sons of Jacob. Those are the patriarchs of Israel. And here before you, we even see we have patriarchs in the church. This is a list of those, or the library of the ante-Nicene fathers of the church. Those fathers, pastors, elders, theologians, evangelists who wrote before about 400. We have patriarchs. Do you imagine that much was written by 400 or so AD? Those are the patriarchs of the church. All right, so now, historically, we think of them in that way. Domestically, by 1817, you'll be tested on this later, the word patriarch was in common use in certain parts of the world. But basically, the idea is that the patriarch is the father of the oikos in the Greek, the family, the damos in Latin. And the patriarch was the male head of the family who led, who managed, who was responsible for the family. Ecclesiastically, do we have fathers in the church? Yes. What does one denomination call their pastors or priests? They call them fathers. And it's interesting, Jesus says, don't ever do that. But they did anyway. But why? Because a pastor of a church does have a fatherly role, right? And so that's how that title got in there. So a patriarch is the leader and the manager of a family. And so in classic literature and in classic leadership and management literature, and we have Rob, good to have you with us today. You're in teaching management at UCF for all these years, and that's great. So one way of looking at the difference between a leader and a manager is the leader, and this is really pedantic, but it's lower level. Leaders tend to see the future and chart the course and set the big picture and then mobilize, influence people to accomplish the goal in the future. Managers then are sort of historically seen that their role is to keep in place the flow of what will enable the leader and the organization to accomplish their goals, the day-to-day activities. And so there's a leader role and there's a manager role. Those are very, very general, of course. But the fact is that a good patriarch leads and what? And manages. And so we have to learn about that as men. And that's why the Apostle Paul says, and it's shocking news to some of us, if any man aspires to the office of overseer in a church, he must be a good leader and manager of his own oikos, his own damos. So let me give you the 5 points of patriarchy. Okay, you ready? I told you I'm a Calvinist. We do everything in 5 points, okay? So I've got the 5 points of patriarchy. I've had 5 points of other things, and there it is. You have to deal with that. So number one, when it comes to patriarchy and being a father, I want you to first of all understand that it's important for you to own your title as a patriarch. I want to encourage you to own the title of patriarch. It's a good word. I don't care what the liberals have said. Patriarch is a good word, and it means you're the father. When I became a husband, I got a brand new title, husband. And it flipped a switch inside of me. And those of you who got married, remember, you're walking down the aisle going, oh no, now I'm responsible for all this, right? Now I got to pay for all this. I got to pay for her. I got to take care of her. So it flips a manhood switch inside of us when we receive the title of husband. When we receive the title of father, it flips another manhood switch inside of us. And we become the patriarch, the father of the family. And it's a good thing, by the way. And so as men, we develop that purpose of leading. I want you to own the title. I want you to not be afraid to say, I'm the patriarch of my family. I want you to not be afraid. I want you to own it. And now, some of you say, I'm not married and I don't have kids. That's okay. You can still be a spiritual father. The Apostle Paul and you're in good company if you're not married and don't have any kids. He had a lot of kids, right? Spiritual children. So you could be a spiritual father and mentor to many others. And that's, by the way, I have three children. I have 7 grandchildren. And so I enjoy that role. But a lot of you, as younger men, not the older guys, but you younger guys, I feel like a lot of you are some of my sons, spiritual sons. I love you as sons. And the rest of you, I love you as brothers. But you know, what a unique title. What a unique role. Own it. Enjoy it. Rest in it. There is a sense in which I'm the patriarch of the Allinson clan family, right? And now I don't deal with my grandkids the way I did with my kids, because that's not my role. However, if they come over to my house and disobey, I will step up. There it is. I love those guys. What a privilege it is. You ought to own the title, all right? That's the first point. Second point is I want you to own the responsibility of patriarch. This is what a lot of men and a lot of men in the church are not willing to do today. They're not willing to own the responsibility. And Wes Bernhardt is here today. Taught me a long time ago as one of the elders of our church that when you're the leader of a church and when you're working with the staff of your church, everybody has, after a staff meeting, the R put next to their name, right, Wes? You taught me about the R. I still use that in our staff meeting with Forge. And the R is the responsibility. Who's got the R when you walk out of staff meeting today? Well, when you walk out of here today, you know that you have the R when it comes to your family, right? I want us as men following Christ to own the responsibility of being the patriarch. There's all kinds of young couples today that are deciding not to have children. And quite frankly, what they're doing is and in the church too. And what they're doing is they're missing a big part of their call as men and as families to produce children. Some of you guys have tons of kids. And I don't know how you have as many kids as you have. I mean, I know how. I just don't know how you pull it off managerially with 6, 7 kids. But we have it here at Forge, and I love it. I'm proud of you guys. That's great. But we have to own our responsibility as leaders. Here's what I've learned. The buck stops with me in the home. The attitude in the home has got to be set by the patriarch, not the matriarch. That's hard today, isn't it? Because in American culture, we have shifted so many of those responsibilities to the matriarch. And yet I learned a long time ago that if the attitude at the home was not good, it was my responsibility to wade in and work on that. Because I'm the one that's going to stand before the God of the universe and give an account for my leadership of my family. That's just the way it's set up. Now, when we have a responsibility, it doesn't mean I'm the dictator of the home, right? Tell Karen what to do, and no, it's much more a clear negotiation, isn't it, of direction? But a leader manager of his family has to work that out with his wife when they get married when they're young and say, how are we going to raise our kids? Where are we going to go to church? How are we going to make sure they're in church on a regular basis? What are we going to teach them about money, about how to relate to one another, and what is acceptable and what's not acceptable? Who's responsible for that? It's the patriarch ultimately, and the matriarch. The mother and the father, as they work together with a lot of negotiation. Will there be spanking? In our home there was, particularly with my firstborn. There had to be, because he was born telling me what to do. He's here today. I love that. We're close. I love it. I love it. But, you know, the second and the third, they kind of watched what happened with the first. And they didn't have to get spanked so much. So it's not that they were better. It's just that they learned. Whoa. Okay, you hear a lot today about gentle parenting. You know what gentle parenting produces? Gentle parenting produces narcissistic kids. I heard the story this past week about a little girl who was with her grandma, and her grandma said, no, you've already had too many of those. You cannot have any more. And the little girl looked at her grandma and ate it anyway, looking at her grandma right in the eye. That little girl is a product of gentle parenting by her mom and dad. And so her grandparents didn't know what to do when she was over her house. Well, there it is. There's a lot of responsibility in a home, isn't there, guys? Ultimately, though we delegate responsibility, the division of labor, ultimately, I'm responsible for what goes on in my home. There are 3 models of leadership that have been in the church down through history: the patriarchal, the dictatorial, and the corporate. The patriarchal is the best. The patriarchal model of leadership is a strong, warm, godly man working with his wife, leading, developing, deciding how that family ought to be left. And yes, when he has to be a man, a real man, doing it, right? The dictatorial doesn't work. The dictatorial is not a biblical model. Honey, you will do this and you will do that and you will. Are there times where we make those statements, guys? Yes. But the dictatorial model doesn't work overall. Neither does the corporate. The corporate model is sort of the dad looking back and saying, no, that's unacceptable, I cut you off. There's also another model, we might call it the wimpy passive model, of the man that just kind of goes along with everything the wife wants. That doesn't work. It's not biblical. Well, there it is. We're not dictators. We're not corporate executives. And there's stages in parenting, aren't there, guys? There's 4 stages. Start with C. When you're developing your kids, the first level is caregiving, right? When they're babies, you're caring for them, you're changing diapers, you're loving them, you're hugging them. You know, you're doing all that. The caregiving, they get a little older, it's the cop stage. No, don't do that. No, you can't do that, honey. Can't do that yet, right? The cop stage, they get a little older in the teenage years, it's the coaching stage. And then when they get older still, you're in the consultant stage. I'm in the consultant stage. I love that. You want my advice? I'll give it. If you don't want my advice, I don't offer it, generally. Generally, I slip back. Get out the old movie, We Were Soldiers Once, with Mel Gibson, that great role model for a man. Okay, he's not. But in that movie, he plays a great role model as a soldier and as a father who is praying with his kids and roughhousing with his kids and interacting with his wife. He really reveals a great model of leadership. And it was in that movie. I love that. You could still be masculine and a leader in the home. I saw a lady yesterday at where I do PT, and she had this T-shirt on, and on this T-shirt it just said 2 words: be kind. And that says a lot of how people view what they want, what women want. They want you to what? Be kind. Can you be masculine, a father, and be kind? Of course. But oftentimes they think you can't. Oftentimes they say if you're going to be a man, you're obviously negative. In fact, they like masculinity when it's tied to femininity. But sometimes we are kind in different ways, aren't we, guys? Can you be tough and tender? Yeah, you must be. Can you be a good listener as a dad, as a man? Of course you can. You must be. Can you also be someone who says, don't do that. We're not going to do that now. When you're out on your own, you can do it if you want. Yes. And so we have to learn the skills of being masculine. Listen, I have a feminine side. Her name is Karen. I don't have a feminine side inside. That's why God gave me a wife. But part of being a man is being tough and tender, loving and straightforward, and learning how to do that. And that's what we need to learn to do. Hypermasculinity is Samson. That's toxic masculinity. All I care about is physical strength. I don't care about you emotionally. All I care about is sexuality. That's Samson. That's toxic masculinity. That's hypermasculinity. That's not us. That's not what we want. All right. Some of you are looking at your watch. I know. I'm almost done, and I'm only on my second point, but I got 3 quick points for you, all right? Ready? All right, so I want you to own your title as patriarchs. I want you to own the responsibility of being a patriarch. The buck stops with you, buck stops with me. And number 3, I want you to own the privilege of being a patriarch. It is an absolute privilege to be a dad, to be a father. And what I find under this point is that so many men want to be respected because they're in the role of father, not how they carry out the role of father. They want to be respected just because they're in that role. And what I say to you is that if you live this role in a godly way, you will be respected. Don't expect to be respected. Be a godly patriarch and you will be respected. And there is great privilege at the end of the day to understand that those who set your agenda are your family, those closest to you. They set your legacy. And how important it is to understand that it's a great privilege to be a patriarch. Own your title, own your responsibility, own your privilege, own your service as a patriarch. As fathers, we are servant leaders in our families. Right? And so that's why we can be tough and tender. That's why we can understand that if we take a view that our wife differs with, by the way, it's okay to differ with your wife. It's how you differ with your wife, right? That was quiet. I mean, all of us have made humongous mistakes in this area. But if we're leaders, a leader is setting the course. And if we're managers, it can't be both ways all the time. I rarely, on major issues, have had to differ with my wife. We've had to negotiate. I've lost some battles. She's lost some battles. It's okay. That's the way life is. The reality is we are servants as patriarchs. And that's so important. And then lastly, own your on-the-job training as a patriarch. Guys, we are constantly learning, right? We are constantly learning at every stage of the game to be the fathers, the spiritual fathers, the men that we want to be in godly relationship and keep growing as Christ followers. Don't be like the guys that tend to ignore the issues in their family, that say this is not a problem, and it is. There are a lot of men who see the issues and never address it, and eventually they develop toxic kids or a toxic marriage. Don't be that guy that pretend that you can straddle the fence on everything. You can't. Make decisions. After prayer, and discussion, and thinking. Recognize the uniqueness of each of your kids and family members. Leading our families is rocket science. Isn't it? It's more complex than you and I can ever imagine. So my last point is, how do we grow in that? I don't know. It's time for you to talk about it around your tables. We don't have tables, so get into your groups. Talk about how you can help each other grow as patriarchs in the family, and we will talk more about this next week. around the tables over there. All right, guys. Thanks for coming to Forge. We'll see you guys soon. You can clap. Good to see you, buddy.
Awesome.
Glad you're here, man.
Thanks.
Glad you're here.
Thank you very much.
You bring a good New England perspective.
Thank you.
I love it. By the way, I love New Englanders. I love them. They're straightforward people.
Yeah.